The message came on February 14, 2026, and it stopped every screen, broadcast, and digital display on Earth at the same time, not with violence, but with a strange, calm authority that made the institution even worse. Halfway through a morning coffee in a Chicago apartment, Dr. Sarah Mitchell's TV flickered. The news anchor's face disappeared and was replaced by something that looked like a holographic transmission. The being that showed up was very tall, very thin, and had skin that looked like polished silver. The eyes were big and dark, and they didn't have any warmth. The being said, "Citizens of Earth," and Sarah knew that everyone on Earth was hearing this in their own language, even though it spoke perfect English. "I am Ambassador Kelvin from the Galactic Council. We have finished looking over your world." Sarah's hand shook so much that she almost spilled her coffee. Billions of people around the world stopped what they were doing. This was the first contact, the moment that people had dreamed about for hundreds of years. "We have classified your planet as a category 1.2G, that world." After a thorough analysis, Kelvin said, his voice showing no emotion, "Your gravity is 20% higher than what is safe. Your air pressure is too high for safety. Your weather systems are extremely violent. Your earthquakes are very strong. Your microbes are very hostile." Sarah's stomach dropped. As a child, she had imagined this wasn't how she would be welcomed into the galactic community. Also, Kelvin's eyes seemed to look right through the screen. "Your species had adapted to these deadly conditions by making biological changes that we think are primitive and not long lasting. We think that your civilization has less than 200 years before environmental factor makes your limited adaptations useless." The being stopped, as if he were waiting for the meaning of his words to sink in. "The Galactic Council doesn't get involved with species that are still developing on that world. We will keep an eye on your situation, but our protocols say we can't help with evacuation or relocation until your population drops below 10 million survivors. We suggest that you stop making plans. This is the end of our evaluation." The transmission stopped as suddenly as it started. Sarah's TV went back to the news anchor, whose face had turned completely white. The world went crazy in just a few hours. Not the violent kind, but the kind that comes from being confused and not believing. There were a lot of theories on social media. Governments rushed to give official answers, and scientists all over the world started quickly looking over the council's claims. Dr. James Chen, a physicist at MIT, was one of the first people to publicly explain the announcement. That night, Sarah and 3 billion other people watched his emergency press conference. James said, "Look, I'll be honest with you," and his usually calm demeanor broke a little. "Technically, they're not wrong about the gravity. Earth's gravity is higher than the most of other planets that can support complex life. But calling it a world of death, that's crazy. We change here. This is how we live." A reporter yelled a question. "Do you really think we're in danger, Dr. Chen?" James ran his hand through his hair. "In danger from what? Our own world? For 300,000 years we've lived here. Yes, we do have earthquakes. Yes, we do get hurricanes. But we've made cities that can stand up to them. We've made technology that works well in these conditions, based on their standards, not ours." But doubt had been planted. The argument got worse over the next few weeks. Some scientists said that the council might have known something we didn't. It could be that our adaptations weren't working, and we just couldn't see it yet. The fact that natural disasters were getting worse might have been proof that they were right. Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, an environmental researcher, was on talk shows and looked frustrated. This is crazy, she said, over and over during one heated argument. Yes, climate change is a real threat, but we made it and we can fix it. The council is acting like we're a species that is going to die soon. No, we're not. The month of March turned to April. The council didn't send any follow up messages, clarifications, or anything else. They were quiet on purpose, almost as if they were angry. It was as if they had made their decision and were now waiting for us to prove them right by panicking. A meeting of the United Nations in Geneva turned into a shouting match. Sarah watched the live stream and felt her heartbeat sink as the representatives argued about whether to formally ask the Council for help or completely ignore the assessment. The Brazilian ambassador yelled, "They're treating us like we're poor, like we're stupid kids who need their help." "But what if they're right?" said the Japanese delegate. "What if we're too proud to see the risk?" Rebecca Torres, the American delegate, slowly stood up. The noise didn't bother her voice. "The council sentenced us to death without giving us any proof. No data, no research papers, and no peer review. Just a statement from above. When did we start believing things without proof?" That question was in the air. Something strange started to happen in May. The first shock and fear began to change into something else, something stronger. Sarah first saw it in the online community she was a part of, then in the streets, and finally in official government statements. People weren't hiding, people were getting mad. On May 28, 17-year-old Marcus Williams from Detroit posted a video that quickly went viral. He stood in front of his high school and looked straight into the camera on his phone. Marcus said, "So let me get this straight," in a defiant voice. "Some aliens came to our house, call it a death trap, say we're basically doomed, and then just leave. Good luck dying, but no help or advice." He laughed, but it wasn't funny. "Hey, you know what? Forget that. The dust bowl didn't kill my great great grandparents. My great grandparents lived through World War II. My grandparents made it through the Cold War. My parents made it through the pandemic. And these aliens think that a little bit of gravity will kill us?" He got closer to the camera. "We're people. We don't give up. We don't just give up and die because someone tells us to. If they think Earth is that world, we'll show them how people act on that world. We live, we change, we make things, and we show everyone that they were wrong." In just 48 hours, 2 billion people watched the video. Sarah watched it 3 times and felt something start to burn in her chest. Marcus was correct. This wasn't how people dealt with problems. They weren't like this. The first petition went online on June 3. It was simple and to the point, and it got 50 million signatures in a week. "We disagree with the Galactic Council's assessment. We want them to back up their claims with scientific evidence, or we will prove them wrong ourselves." The council never got back to me, but people had already begun to move. The movement began in the most unlikely place, a Seattle coffee shop. Architect Maya Rogers met with structural engineers Tom Baker and atmospheric scientist Dr. Lynn Fitzgerald on June 15th. They didn't want to change the world. They were just three angry professionals who had been watching the global debate get worse for months. "I'm so tired of the defeatist talk," Maya said as she stirred her third espresso of the morning. "Every news channel is either freaking out about the council being right or debating whether or not we should ask them for help. No one is saying what we can really do. Tom nodded and took out his tablet. I've been doing some math. You know, just in case. What if the council is right about threats on the surface? What if all of this gravity, weather, seismic activity really is worse here than on other planets? Tom, that's not helping, Lynn said. No, wait, listen to me. That look in Tom's eyes was the same one engineers get when they know they're into something. If the surface is the issue, what is the answer? Maya bent over. Are you really saying we should all move underground? Opposite direction, Tom said, and a smile spread across his face. We go up, Lynn said. She blinked. Up? Like into the air? Just like into the air. Tom's finger flew over his tablet, bringing up rough drafts. Give it some thought. We're not dealing with earthquakes above ground. We can work around gravity. We have full control over our surroundings. We build cities in the sky. That's crazy, Maya said quietly. That's brilliant, Lynn said after a moment. That's impossible. The energy needs alone would be huge. Yes, Tom said, but not impossible. We have the tools. Solar, wind, and maybe even atmospheric energy harvesting. For decades, we've been talking about cities that float. We just never had a reason to build them. Maya was already drawing on her own tablet, and her architect's mind was racing ahead. Building in parts, each part is able to support itself. We could start small, show that it works, and then grow, Lynn said. You two are crazy, but she was happy. You want to rebuild human civilization in the clouds because some aliens hurt our feelings? No, Maya said softly. We're talking about showing that people don't need anyone's permission to do well. Does the council think we're doomed? We show them that we can make paradise anywhere we want. Three people could have just been daydreaming over coffee, and that could have been the end of the conversation. Maya did something, though, that changed everything. She put it down on paper. 2 days later, she put out a document online called the Sky City Manifesto, Engineering Humanity's Defiant Future. It was 17 pages of idea for buildings, engineering rules, and big plans. The Galactic Council has said that our home is a death world. Instead of accepting their decision or begging for their mercy, we suggest a third option. We completely exceed their expectations. We will make cities in the sky that can take care of themselves and turn the problems on our own planet into opportunities. We will show that the best thing about being human is not just getting by in spite of conditions on Earth, but doing well because of them. This is not a step back. This is a change. Sarah couldn't sleep, so she downloaded the manifesto at 2 in the morning. She read it twice, and her heart racing. This was the end. This was the answer that people had been looking for. She had company. The manifesto had been downloaded 40 million times by the morning, 200 million by the end of the week. People from all over the world, including engineers, architects, scientists, and dreamers, started to get in touch. People started to think in the comments of Maya's original post. Someone from Singapore suggested using advanced weaving of carbon nanotubes to support structures. A group from Norway came up with new ways to filter air. A 16-year-old from Kenya came up with a water reclamation system that worked 99% of the time. The movement grew in natural, chaotic, and beautiful way. On July 1st, something that never had happened before happened. The governments of 12 countries made a joint announcement about the Sky City initiative, not through the UN, which was still fighting over rules, not through any current international framework. This was something different. Brazil's president, Helena Vasquez, spoke up at the announcement, and her voice could be heard all over the world. For too long, we have let our differences keep us apart. We have fought each other for too long when we should have worked together. The Galactic Council's review was meant to make us feel bad. It has brought us together instead. Today, we are announcing the biggest project that people have ever worked on together. They told us we couldn't have the future. There were leaders from Japan, Kenya, India, Germany, Mexico, South Korea, Egypt, Canada, Australia, and Sweden next to her, standing shoulder to shoulder with their traditional enemies. Next, the Prime Minister of China spoke. We are sharing what we have learned about material science and construction technology. We ask that all countries join us. This has nothing to do with politics. This is about showing what people can do when they work together. In just 2 weeks, 37 countries had officially signed up for the initiative. That number went up to 93 in a month. Even countries that weren't officially involved were sending scientists and engineers to help. Sarah, who had been watching from the sidelines, was pulled in. She had a background in urban planning, and as soon as the call went out for experts to help design the social infrastructure of the sky cities, she applied. A panel that included Maya Rogers herself did the interview over video call. Why do you want to be part of this? Maya asked. Sarah thought long and hard. The council looked at us and saw failure. They saw a species that was barely able to survive in a world that was hostile to it. But when I look at the history of people, I see something else. I see people who made Venice out of a swamp. I see people who turned an island with no natural resources into Singapore. I see people who do well in deserts, mountains, and frozen tundras. We don't suggest get by in tough places. We make them into homes. And now we're going to do it in the air. She was accepted that day. In August, the first design summit took place in Geneva. Sarah walked into a conversation center full of thousands of smartest people on earth. Engineers and architects fought over how much weight their buildings could hold. Biologists and agronomists argued about how well vertical framing works. Artists and psychologists worked together to make sure that the cities would not only work but also feel like home. Tom Baker stood on stage and talked about the main idea behind the structure they had decided to call Leviathan Foundations. He said, traditional buildings fight gravity. As huge holographic diagrams floated around him, they pushed down into the ground, which makes huge pressure points. But we use gravity different in the sky. We use a mix of lighter than air materials and active stabilization systems to spread weight over huge platforms in the atmosphere. You could say they are the man made island in air. A voice from the crowd that sounded doubtful called out. And what if a hurricane hits? Tom smiled. We move. Sky cities are not tied to one place like surface cities are. We can get around bad weather and use it as a source of energy when it's safe. The air isn't our enemy, it's our highway. Lynn Fitzgerald presented next, her section on atmospheric harvesting. She said, we're not just building in the air, we're making something out of it. We can get water vapor, compress gases from the air for fuel, and collect minerals from particles in the air using advanced filtration and processing. Each city will be able to take care of itself 95% of the time. The project started right away. They built test facilities in faraway places. They built prototypes and put them through the stress test. Failures happened, and they were both amazing and useful. During a windstorm, a test platform in Nevada fell apart, forcing engineers to start over. A test life support system in Iceland broke down, almost suffocating the crew. But every time something went wrong, They learned something. With every failure came new ideas. Sarah worked 18 hours a day to plan out the social structure of what they were calling neighborhoods. How do you make a community in the sky? How do you connect people who are floating kilometers above the ground? Gardens were her answer. Huge lush green areas in the middle of each neighborhood. She told her team that people need to see things grow and that places where kids could play, families could gather, and life could feel normal even when things were at their worst were important. They need to feel like they're part of life and nature. They aren't just things to look at. These are psychological anchors. The first full scale prototype was ready for testing by October. They named it Genesis Module Alpha. It was small, just big enough to hold 50 people for 6 months, but it did work. 2 billion people watched the live stream of the launch in November when it smoothly rose into the sky over the Australian outback. Sarah stood in control center, crying as the module settled down at 15,000 feet. They had done it. They had done it. Despite all the doubts, setbacks, and times of fear, Marcus William, a teenager whose video had gone viral months before, was chosen as one of the 50 civilians to test Genesis. Almost everyone on Earth saw his first broadcast from the module. Hey Earth! He was smiling at the camera. The window behind him showed the curved horizon. What's the view like up here? It's really cool. And guess what? It doesn't feel like we're trying to escape from anything. We're reaching for something bigger. It feels like. He showed off a small plant he had been growing in the module garden. This council said this was a world of death, but life always finds a way, especially when that life is a human. The message was clear. People weren't giving up. People were rising up. In January 2027, construction began on Haven 1, which would become the first real sky city for people. Sarah stood in the command center on the ground in New Zealand, watching dozens of screens show different views of the construction site floating 20,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean. It felt like a dream come true to see the building take shape. Phase 1 modulus are in place. Tom's voice crackled through the speakers. He was up there in the construction pod, watching the first pieces come together. Starting the integration sequence, zero gravity fabrication was a new way of building that made the sky cities possible. They built directly in the atmosphere instead of on the ground and lifting pieces into the air, which would have been too expensive and dangerous. The big idea came from Dr. Raymond Park, a materials scientist from Seoul. Sarah had been in the meeting when he gave it, and he could barely contain his excitement. Raymond has said, "We've been thinking about this wrong," as he walked back and forth in the front of the engineers. "We don't need to lift old materials into the air. We can make things out of what's already up there." He had brought up diagrams of molecules. The air has everything we need. There are nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, water vapor, and even small amount of minerals in the air. We can get these elements out of the air and put them back together into whatever we need with solar powered atmospheric processors. Fiber made of carbon, aluminium that is see through, bioplastics. We're basically making building materials out of thin air. The effects had been huge. No more supply chains that reach all the way to the ground. No more weak transportation systems. They had everything they needed right there with them. Every sky city was built on top of the atmospheric processors. Huge, beautiful machines that looked like giant jellyfish floating through the clouds, always gathering and refining materials. Lynn Fitzgerald's team had improved the design by adding systems for collecting energy. "Why only gather materials?" she had said. The air is also full of energy, wind, solar radiation, and differences in temperature. Each processor can make more power than it needs. By March 2027, they had 12 atmospheric processors running around the Haven 1 construction site, making tons of refined materials every day. Brave workers like Tom would drive construction pods to pick up these materials and put them together according to the master plan. Sarah saw the first residential ring take shape. It looked like a huge wheel that was floating and was 2 miles wide, with spokes connecting to a central hub. The design wasn't just for looks, it was also useful. The rotation made the outer rings feel like they had gravity, while the center stayed in almost zero gravity. For industrial processes, structural integrity is holding at 98%, said Maria Santos, the chief structural engineer. We're ahead of schedule. But the real innovation wasn't just in how they built things, it was in what they used to build. Everyone was calling ether weave, what Dr. Amara Osi, a biochemist from Ghana, had made. It was a material that looked impossible. It was lighter than aluminium, stronger than titanium, and semi transparent. Sarah had gone to Amara's lab to watch it made. The process was fascinating. Atmospheric processors sent raw materials to bioengineered bacterial colonies that literally wove the materials together, molecule by molecule, to make sheets of shimmering substance that looked like solidified air. Amara had said the bacteria are modified from extremophiles, holding up a sample that bent light like a crystal but didn't weigh much. They do well in places with low oxygen and high altitudes. They're not just making the stuff, they live in it, fixing any damage and getting used to stress all the time. The buildings are alive. Living? Sarah had asked, touching the fabric. It felt warm like skin. The ether weave has a metabolic rate, Amara said with a smile. It breathes. It fixes itself if it gets hurt. A hole that would be very bad for a regular building. It takes the weave just a few minutes to seal it. It's architecture that won't die. The effects on safety were huge. Sky cities couldn't afford to have their buildings fall apart. A collapse as 2,000 feet would be a disaster. But with self healing materials and buildings that live, the risk went down to almost nothing. The main building of Haven 1 was finished by June 2027. It was huge, a floating city that could hold 50,000 people. But it was still empty and still needed all the systems that would make it livable. That's when the Leviathan foundations showed how useful they were. A huge storm system formed out of nowhere in the Pacific. It was a hurricane that would have been a disaster for any normal construction project. Sarah's anxiety grew as she watched the weather reports. At an emergency meeting, she asked, should we evacuate the construction crews? Tom, who was video calling from Haven 1 itself, shook his head. No need. Look at this. Sarah saw the city start to move on the screens, not quickly or dramatically, but with a smooth, purposeful grace. The huge platform just sailed around the storm, thanks to its distributed weight system and active stabilization. The Leviathan foundations aren't just holding us up, Tom said, clearly proud. They're letting us move around. The weather doesn't have control over us anymore. We dance with it. The storm passed below without causing any problem, and the construction went on without any problems. The next problem was the life support system. 50,000 people need air, water, food, and a way to get rid of waste. You could trust the natural systems of the air. Everything in the sky had to be planned out. The environmental system team was led by Dr. James Chen, who had become one of the project's most important people. James showed Sarah diagrams of the interconnected system they had made for their closed loop ecology. Think of each sky city as a miniature Earth, he said. We have atmospheric processors that give us fresh air. We have water reclamation that works 99.7% of the time. Our vertical farms grow more food per square foot than any other farming. We also have biological waste processing that turns everything into biofuel or fertilizer. He pulled up a beautiful picture of what he called the Green Heart, a huge central garden that was going to be built in the Havens One Center. This isn't just for show. This ecosystem works. Trees and plants take in carbon dioxide, make oxygen, keep humidity stable, and even affect how people feel mentally. We're not making a machine that keeps people alive. We're making a living space that people can be a part of. The farming systems were really cool. Sarah went to test site in Chile, where they were working on perfecting the methods. There are towers of vertical gardens, with each level set up to grow a different type of crop. At the top, where there was a lot of light, there were lettuce and herbs. There are root vegetables in the middle. At the bottom, there are mushrooms and other fungi that do well in low light. The agricultural director said, "We can grow food for 1,100 more people in a space that would feed maybe 1,000 people using traditional farming. And since everything is controlled, there are no floods, droughts, or crop failures in a way that farming on Earth can never be. It's reliable." They were ready to start moving people in by the end of 2027, not all at once, but in waves of 50,000 test groups that would help find problems and improve systems. Sarah was in the first group. She had spent months planning these cities, and now she would get to live in one. The ride up was surprisingly smooth. She was in a pressurized shuttle with 40 other people, and she could see through the window as Earth fell away and Haven 1 got bigger above them. The first time she stepped into the city, she was amazed. The main concourse was huge and curved gently to follow the ring's rotation, and it was green, so green that it's hard to believe. There were trees along the paths, and their roots were firmly planted in well planed soil beds. The flowering plants added colors. The sound of flowing streams was calming, thanks to the water features. "Welcome home," Maya Rogers said as she appeared next to her. For weeks, the architect had been living on Haven 1, making sure everything was perfect. "What do you think?" Sarah couldn't think of anything to say. She had a hand in making some of this. She had looked at the plans, the models, and the pictures, but it was different to actually go through it. "It feels alive," she finally said. "That's because it is," Maya said, pointing around them. "All the surfaces you see have ether weave on them. The city is alive with us. The gardens are taking care of the carbon dioxide we breathe out. The water features are part of the system that keeps the air moist. There is nothing here that is just for looks. Everything has a reason." Sarah lived in the residential ring, which was a small apartment with floor to ceiling windows that looked out at the curved horizon of earth below. The clouds floated by so close you could touch them. Sarah had a deep thought that first night as she lay in the bed and looked at the stars. They didn't just make a city in the sky, they had made a new way to live, a balance between what people need and what machines can do that felt more natural than many surface cities. The next morning, she woke up to the sun shining through her window and the smell of fresh bread from the bakery 3 doors down. She got ready for work and walked through gardens and along paths where kids were playing already. One of them yelled, "Dr. Mitchell!" A girl, maybe 8 years old, ran up with a flower she had picked. "Hey, I grew this in the garden for the kids." Sarah knelt down. and looked at the flower with the right amount of seriousness. That's great work. What kind is it? My teacher helped me make it hybrid. It's a mix of a rose and an orchid. We're trying out ways to crossbreed. 8 years old are trying out advanced botany. People who lived in Sky City did that. It made the impossible seem normal. Haven 1 had 10,000 people living there by December 2027. The city worked perfectly. The energy systems did better than expected. They made so much food that they had extra. They were actually making more fresh water than they used through water reclamation and storing the extra for future cities. And in space, above Haven 1, work had started on Haven 2, 3, and 4. The revolution had started.